Welcome to the Rainier View Christian Church podcast, where we invite you to pursue God, engage in community, and make a difference.
All right, hey there, this is Mike, and this is our third, fourth, fifth, who knows, our episode of bonus features for the podcast. If you're wondering why we call it bonus features, I'm just a dork. I like movies. I stream movies, whatever, but I love actual DVDs and Blu-rays. And the bonus features are all those things like it's not the core content, but it's extra things that like the directors want to include. Like, I don't know if we're going to be a blooper reel today. It may end up being that way, but we just like adding on extra stuff that it's not necessarily Sunday morning content, but things that we want to be able to talk about, things that are going to be important. And that's kind of where we're going today in today's podcast. We're going to be talking about a topic that doesn't really get addressed a whole lot at our church, but we want to start addressing it more and more often. So you guys know me. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. My name is Mike. I am the digital ministry pastor here. And special guest today. Special guest. This is like the second time you've been on it out of 4 times. But Corey Wilson, just share with us really quickly who you are, what you do at the church, and your favorite kind of toothpaste.
So my name is Corey. I'm our student ministries pastor here and a member of our teaching team. And so glad to be back on the bonus features here, doing the director's commentary.
Excellent.
And so my favorite type of toothpaste, I'm just a Crest guy.
Okay. The classics.
Just go with the classics.
As long as you didn't answer Mentadent, we're fine.
Mentadent, I think should be burned, in a bin somewhere.
You might as well just take a piece of coal and rub it against your teeth.
Which I'm also against the coal. People use the black toothpaste. I'm like, no, I'm good.
That's weird.
Anyway,
okay. Well, today, we're coming in here, and June 19th, otherwise known as Juneteenth. Mm-hmm. If I'm totally honest, Corey, I think prior to last year, I had heard the word Juneteenth, but I just didn't understand what it was. We did an event here last year, and even like last year was the first time that I understood like that was the true ending of slavery. Like,
right.
That's what it comes down to. Like, but that's like bare bones. I'm sure there's plenty of people out me that I want to actually know more though. Mm-hmm. You've done some study, like you're by no means an expert or anything like that, but Corey also leads our multi-ethnic, team here on trying to like help us move forward as a church and kind of growing and becoming a multi-ethnic church and understanding issues within, race and diversity and all sorts of things. Yeah. So, kind of as you've been learning and growing over the past year, what are some of the things that would be helpful? And actually, I think you've got a resource that you want to be able to share with us.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've leaned into as like a multi-ethnic team is organizations that we feel like we can really trust what they're doing comes from a biblical perspective. It's very driven by the same kind of motivations that we have as a church and organization. So the one that we lean into the most probably is Be the Bridge, bethebridge.org. And they had a great post that they put out last year. And I think like you and like many of us, and we'll say this a little bit more today as well, but, I feel like I'm fairly new to this conversation about Juneteenth, coming to a little bit better of an understanding every year about what it means, what it entails. And I think that's great because I think all of us are on a journey of learning. So for some people, this is definitely, this is like a very obvious thing to them. And for some, it's not as obvious. So I definitely feel like I'm still, learning a lot about this. But just so you guys have a better sense of what Juneteenth is, this is what Be the Bridge put out last year, just the top of this statement here. So they put out a statement that just said, hey, happy Juneteenth. It's a special day on which we celebrate Black freedom and achievement. The history of it is basically this. Slavery persisted in the southern U.S. after the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. In remote corners of the Confederacy, news of slavery's end did not come until 2 months later after that, after Robert E. Lee surrendered in 1865, April 1865. The day the General Order No. 3 was finally delivered to the people of Galveston, Texas, was June 19th, 1865. And that's the day slavery finally ended in the Confederacy. So Juneteenth commemorates this announcement. And it's important to know that slavery itself really was not fully abolished until the passage of the 13th Amendment on December 6, 1865. So this is the kind of the marking and commemorating of that announcement, and then of course, and they say it here, as we all know, the end of slavery did not mark the end of discrimination. Black people in America have had to overcome countless social injustices throughout history and continue to fight for equality today. Juneteenth is important not just for Black Americans, but for all Americans. Juneteenth and the events that leading up to the freedom for all Americans must be understood and supported by all, so everyone can have the opportunity to live in a just society that does not discriminate on the basis of the color of your skin or other differences. And this is one of the things that's fascinating to me, of course, is that a lot of people mark it differently, and so not everybody celebrates this day the same way. For some people, it's really hard. Some people, it's really fun. So they point this out here, and I think this is great. Juneteenth is also a celebration of the many achievements of the Black community and the richness of the African American heritage. On Juneteenth, many families get together to eat and to dance and to celebrate their culture. They may also take time to honor the history of their ancestors, whose stories stretch back thousands of years to African civilization. So one of the things I take away from that is that not everybody celebrates this the same way. For some people, it's a painful day. For some people, it's a fun day. For some people, it's a day that they may not even have. Even for people of color or Black people in America, they may not have grown up celebrating this. So as you think about and learn about this, just keep in mind everybody has their own culture. Everybody has their own perspective. No one's a monolith, and certainly no one in your friend group or family group is responsible to teach you what their perspective is. And so, if you're going to go out and ask your neighbors about this, if you have a relationship where that's already your dynamic, that's great. But this is not something you should ever approach someone on the street and be like, "Hey, tell me about Juneteenth." That's not helpful. People don't like that.
Yeah.
And it's also not everybody has the same perspective for themselves about what this day means. But because it's such a big deal in terms of our history as a nation, and because it's also a big deal for certain people in our country, because it marks such a significant event, it's worth remembering, it's worth learning about, and it's worth celebrating, I think, however we choose to do that. And last year we did that by taking a moment of lament. And part of the statement from Be the Bridge here that we cut out is very relevant to last year, but is true of every year, that part of the complicated nature and part of the reason we did lament last year was because there were events going on in our country that were very painful, and people, tons of people were suffering from painful recent events in terms of injustice and the conflict over those ideas in our country. So it was very relevant to do some way of marking the occasion by feeling those feelings, just as God does. God's feels and understands our pain. So it's worth us engaging as Christians, as believers, as people. It's worth us engaging in a moment to kind of remember that and mark that occasion.
Yeah, it's funny because it's interesting. In a lot of things, when you experience something for the first time, you can almost make this association in your mind of this is how it should be recognized every time. And so for people that came out, to this lamenting prayer service, it could be totally easy just to recognize Juneteenth as so this must be a day of lament. And it's not, that's not what it's supposed to be. Well, I don't think there's anything that's supposed to be.
Yeah, there's not a supposed to be.
Yeah, there's no supposed to be. People are gonna recognize it and do different things, but it's not meant to be only one thing. Of this is a day where I've got to lament over the injustice, and it shouldn't be just placed in a little box like that.
Yeah, and again, some people are going to be marking this day because it's like an annual traditional fun memory. My family celebrates St. Swithin's Day, or sometimes does, which is the apple festival that happens once a year in June, I think. But it's not a real thing. But our family kind of started following it. No one else celebrates St. Swithin's Day, but a lot of people. But we treated it was one of those things we chose that we would have a lot of fun because it was a great for a season. It was a fun thing for just our family, just unique to us. And I think the same is true in this case. Some people will still be and will always be dealing with different issues than others of us. And so some people will be dealing this year. It is still a painful thing for them, or will perpetually be a painful day for them because we're talking about the end of slavery, a generational like pain, and an evil practice for hundreds of years. I mean, this isn't something like that in and of itself is worth like, oh yeah, we can always lament that fact. Definitely. It's like we can always say, of the events of World War II, like that, all of that was bad. We shouldn't there's not going to be a day where it's just like, oh, we're over it now. And I think it's okay and again, it's not like we're giving approval here, but it's like, it's okay for us to recognize some people, that is how they mark the day. Other people, it is like a family holiday. They get together, they have food, they celebrate. And again, even other people, who this day may be important to them, they may not do anything. So it's just kind of like we all have a different, and for people who are like, I'm brand new to this conversation, this podcast is literally the first time I've heard anybody utter the word Juneteenth. Okay, then like you're going to have a different way of interpreting how you're going to experience this day. And maybe that is, and this is what I would encourage, because this is what you and I both did, is once you hear about it, it's like, oh, let me go learn about it. Let me just explore. Maybe this day, the way I'm going to mark this is I'm going to spend an extra 10 minutes poking around the internet to understand what Juneteenth is about.
Yeah. So and I think it's just important, and I don't even know if I should be saying this, but I think unfortunately in America,
it's always good to start a sentence that way.
Yeah, exactly. But what we do a lot of times is like, we take a specific day or a holiday and we end up turning it into something that it's not supposed to be. Like, Valentine's Day, like, the Valentine's Day massacre, like, how we turned it into like this day of like all about love, like St. Patrick's Day like is National Drinking Day, like what like Cinco de Mayo, like there's all these different holidays and things that like we've turned it into something that it's not. And so I think something
Cinco de Mayo in America,
to celebrate,
so different than it is
exactly
in
like
other parts of the world.
I think a way to truly celebrate Juneteenth is to recognize it for what it is and what it represents and the importance of that, as opposed to like, well, let's just celebrate today. Like, well, what are you celebrating? Like, it's okay to celebrate as long as you know what you're celebrating.
Start from an informed perspective, and then make some decisions about what's great for your community. And again, it's like this might be an opportunity just to understand the people in your community, like the people that live next door to you, or maybe the people in your own household, and what it might mean for them. And of course, in our church, we have a diversity of people who come from all kinds of different backgrounds, cultures, and ethnicities. And so it is worth us saying, I mean, what you just said, actually, we have a huge Hispanic population in our church. And it's worth us examining how we talk about and celebrate even Cinco de Mayo, because that's also a complicated thing for a lot of people. So I think what you're saying, like starting from a place of learning, understand what you're doing or understand what the day is about, and then make some decisions about what's good for people in your life and for yourself in terms of celebrating or marking it, or what might feel right for you in terms of finding a way to do it this year. So
and again, like coming from that place of learning and realizing that like and I'm not about to go out like if I read an article on Wikipedia or whatever, like, or if I check out the Be the Bridge blog, like I'm not going to go out and automatically assume that like I know what there is to know now, and so let me go and educate everybody. Like, no, I want to continue to learn and engage in conversations and not put myself out there to be somebody who knows it all. Like, I want to be a lifelong learner, not about just Juneteenth, but overall, like, how do we bring racial reconciliation and unity and how difficult that process is, and not just like paint a rainbow on it. Like, this is going to be easy, but
it's all good. No.
This is challenging stuff.
What's interesting to me, and I think it's super important, again, pointing back to Be the Bridge, one of the things I love about that organization is they very much have understood, or at least have spent some time grappling with how to have these conversations. And one of the things that they have said numerous times is like, just be careful throwing around labels for yourself about like how expert you are.
Yes.
And so one of the things I say is like, a lot of us might have the desire, or maybe we've seen it on social media, this concept of being an ally or being a champion of something, of somebody else or of a culture. And one of the things that they say is like, it's fine to desire to be that thing. Don't ascribe that label to yourself. You and I, in our conversations previously, have talked about like, you're more expert or I'm more expert about certain areas of this discussion. And we don't say that like, I'm an expert about this. I say like, maybe in terms of our learning process,
Yeah.
each one of us has outdistanced the other in terms of I've read this thing more, or you've looked into this thing more. Neither one of us should be saying of each other, oh, like Mike's an expert, Corey's an expert.
Yeah.
We're very much still like at the little tiny baby learning stage, and I think it's healthy for all of us to just continue to remember, like, all of us are always learning.
Yeah.
If you're doing things right, you should always be learning and constantly growing. And it's not something that you're like, I'm going to reach a stage where someday I'm just going to be the man about this topic.
Go
it's
out
like
on the speaking circuit and
Yeah,
just
I mean,
educate everybody.
I guess you could try that, but I don't. For me, I don't think that's the right perspective.
Yeah.
So
and it's something I think it's super important as we engage in these conversations. Like if there's anything that I've even said in our 15 minutes here so far, like that's been off, like, please help me. I think we have to enter these conversations. Like, if I'm off, or if my understanding's not there, or if I've said something that, like, is off in some way, like, man, let me know. Like, don't like point me and call me an idiot or anything like that. But like, hey, actually what you were talking about, like, from what I've read, from what I understand, like, it's actually from so I think it's good to enter these conversations with some true humility of, like, I want to keep learning, even learning from mistakes of misreading things or misapplying it, and how do I continue in this process of learning and realizing that I'm not always going to get it right. Like, I'm probably going to say some things that, like, wow, that was really foolish to say.
Yeah.
How do I move forward? How do I continue learning and growing so I make less mistakes? Because I'm going to continue to make them. How do I make less and grow?
We've talked. I mean, I've used this phrase before with you and with some of our like multi-ethnic team. Like, the only way to start is to start, and we're just gonna make mistakes. And again, you're right. Like, even in the few minutes we've been talking, like, we may have already made mistakes, or undoubtedly we have. We got two imperfect people in a room. It's guaranteed to happen. So we're not entering into this saying, like, oh yeah, listen to this as like we're getting all of this 100% right. But I think the effort is we want to engage in the conversation. We want to start the conversation, and we're holding it all loosely because we know that as God is calling us to a purpose. He's working slowly in the process of making us more like his son, but that doesn't mean that we've arrived. So in every conversation, we're going to be saying, like, we're going to make mistakes, and our goal as pastors, as communicators, as church leaders, is always to be, as we hear from people, hey, this didn't go great, or hey, I'm not sure I understand this. For us to then mull and to spend time, like, where did we get it wrong? How can we do better next time?
Yeah, asking questions is huge, because I think sometimes we can be afraid. I know I can be afraid to enter into some difficult conversations because I just feel like I don't know enough. And so I'd rather just sit back and listen to the conversation. Yeah. And there's part of that, like, you have to be a listener, but you've also got to be willing to kind of enter the danger of it. Like, okay, like, I'm going to get in there, I'm going to open my mouth, and hopefully I'm going to ask more questions than just make statements. But we have to be willing to enter into those conversations. Otherwise, true learning isn't going to happen if I'm just going to be a passive observer of what's going on.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So what are some of the things that have kind of stood out to you, like, in your process? Like, what's one of the biggest things that you've learned, and whether it's just studying about Juneteenth or kind of leading the multi-ethnic initiative, what are some of the things that you're really taking away as we consider kind of this day of Juneteenth? Yeah.
So one of the things I think is right off the bat is about motivation. We hear a lot from people about why this conversation, why is this a strategic part of our church's effort? I mean, our whole staff kind of unanimously recognized this is a direction that we need to work and grow in. So what's the motivation? And I've learned a lot about what it looks like, especially in the Christian community, to more closely resemble God's design for the church and what that means in this context. And so for me, like, one of the things that you'll see this elsewhere in our social media and stuff like that, but one of the core principles that I've taken away is this idea of Jesus's command at the Last Supper, which, again, it follows the moment where he takes off his outer garment, kneels down and washes a bunch of dirty feet. He takes on the role of a servant. He does something that's personally degrading for the sake of love. And then after that, of course, he goes to the cross and gives this perfect example of what love, to the furthest extent, how far you should go. And of course, all over Scripture, Jesus says, pick up your cross, follow me. And then he goes and shows us what that looks like. So, but again, the motivation here is I am striving every day to be more like Jesus, to follow his example and to fulfill his command. And in the case, we're talking about the command, like love one another. As I have loved you, you should love one another. And that is how people will know you are my disciples, because of that love. And so for me, it's like my motivation in all of this is not to be, more socially acceptable. It's not to engage in a political conversation. It's not to be right or to somehow puff myself up by becoming more expert than somebody else in a conversation. My motivation here 100% of the time, and I, again, imperfectly, because I'm a sinful person, but like my motivation is to be more like Jesus and to follow his command. And for us, that's been like, there's lots of scriptures that point to this idea of the role of the follower, the role of the disciple, again, is to emulate God's work in the world towards others. And in this conversation, we all come into it from different places. Some people, again, Juneteenth, this may be a brand new thing for them today. Other people, they've been hearing about this perhaps from a more secular perspective on a regular basis in their job, and they're frustrated with it. And so us talking about it is just going to be a tough moment.
Yes.
And there's other people who, like, they're looking at us and saying, why weren't we having this conversation at Rainier View 10 years ago?
Absolutely.
So we're all over the place on this stuff. And I think the thing that I learned, and just, like, we made mistakes on the multi-ethnic team right out of the gate. And we honestly, we lost members of our team because of the failures on my part, certainly, to recognize everything that we should be doing. And also just, we learned that it's just tough. Like this, even on a team that is highly motivated and highly driven and understands this biblical principle, is just complicated. And so, but in that group, as we went along throughout this year, more and more, the more that we engaged in what was tough, the multifold of God's grace being poured out by each other as we conflicted and sometimes, had to like turn off the camera or the mic on the Zoom call. As we had those intense moments, the opportunity for God's love and God's grace expanded. It didn't detract. The conflict that we had actually increased the opportunity for God to demonstrate his love through us as we gave grace and loved each other in a painful conversation. And again, on that team, we have, a number of people of color who have a diversity of opinions and cultures and perspectives. Not all of them are coming to that conversation from the same place. And they, even in their own words, were like, there's a lot of things we're learning from you guys that we hadn't, for those of us who are not people of color, everybody is learning together. And again, for me, it was just this expanding of the opportunity to experience a dimension of God's love that I hadn't experienced before, because I was willing, because all of us were willing to be like, I'm just going to live. I'm just going to, put my heart on my sleeve, and I'm going to ask questions first. I'm going to assume the best of others first. I'm going to assume that everybody in this room wants the best for me, and I want the best for them. And I want all of us to experience what the church can look like. I mean, we talked about this a number of times. This great, I'm kind of rambling here, I guess, but like there's this great picture, and this is all over this stuff. When we look at it from a biblical perspective, the picture in Scripture of how they like into the world, the last moments of humanity as we enter into eternity with God. The picture is this multifaceted gem. It is this, like, every culture, every tribe, every ethnicity gathered around the throne of God. It is this active, engaged, worshipful experience, and everything is, there's so much uniqueness in that unity. And it's such a beautiful and powerful image. And we're like, that's the day we yearn for. And if that's our motivation, if that's what we're going for, we know that we're going to get there someday. But if that's what we're striving for, man, we get to experience a small sliver of it.
Can we start practicing it now?
It's just a taste. It's a foretaste. But it is such a blessing that we wouldn't if we didn't try.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's funny, like, just to go back a couple minutes when you're talking about motivation, man, I just got this picture in my head of, like, man, when we look to the New Testament and we look at the differences between Jesus's followers, his disciples, and the Pharisees, and what we see is, like, the Pharisees, they want to look like they're doing all the right things. They want other people to think that they're doing all the right things. They want to look politically correct or whatever it is, like, but... And they believe at all times that they're the only ones that have all the right answers. And then we've got the disciples who are these bumbling idiots who make mistakes all the time, but they keep following Jesus and they're willing to enter into these conversations. And even after Jesus ascends, like, the church is marked by, like, we're going to work together to do this. And it's not any one person putting themselves above anybody else. And it's like, as we look to these issues, it's like, let's live a lot more like disciples of Jesus than Pharisees and teachers of the law who just aren't really willing to listen because they've already got the answers, and that's not going to get us anywhere. And we see it all over the place in our world where the people that, like, just position themselves of, like, yep, I already know it all, I'm good to go, like, they're going to be holding everybody else back.
Well, that's the thing. The behavior of the Pharisees is about having an intellectual argument about getting as close to the line of the perception of holiness, which in their culture was largely about like not breaking a command as opposed to fulfilling a command. It was about, like, avoiding God's judgment as opposed to seeking to please God with their behavior. And so, like, the difference between, as you're saying, between that and the disciples is it's that like, Brene Brown has that whole thing about vulnerability being this act of daring greatly from, I think it's Teddy Roosevelt. I'm gonna slaughter this whole thing. I think it's Teddy Roosevelt quoting, like, the guy in the arena, and it's not about whether or not you succeed or fail. And I think that's true of the disciple. If someone is seeking to follow Christ, it's not about whether or not you succeed or fail, because we see in the disciples a constant stream of trying and failing. Peter jumps out of a boat, walks on water with Jesus, and totally sinks at a certain point. But he tried. I mean, he engaged, and what Jesus, like, commends and shapes and teaches his disciples is this activity. It's not about, can you argue with me about, do you know your Torah in that context? And we have made so much of Christianity about an intellectual argument about truth, and we forget what it means to be love in action. And so much of Jesus's command to his disciples is about, okay, learn, understand, obviously pursue me intellectually. That's not, like, it's not all about experience. But once you've done that, the next step is go out and do likewise. So,
it's good. Man, there is so much more that we could talk about, and we will, but not in this particular podcast. This is something that we want to continue to address because it's important. This is something that we all have a lot to learn, a lot to grow. Corey, are there any resources in the meantime? We'll probably attach some of these so you can check it out, but are there any resources just offhand that you'd recommend for people that want to continue to learn and to grow in this area?
Yeah, so we're going to put some links on our social media for these resources, but you can actually read that full article from Be the Bridge last year, and I'm not sure if they'll put something out again this year. They actually typically don't, but last year they were speaking specifically about the issues that were going on in America last year. But there's going to be a link for that on our social media, and I think there's an email going out as well. And then another thing that I would point to is, again, it depends on where you are in this journey. Maybe you're just starting off. We've got we've read a number of books as a team that come from Be the Bridge and come from different resources. But one of the things that we as a church enjoy is having this Right Now media, which It's like a giant catalog, and so you never know what's in there that's good. But Jamar Tisby, who is a Christian author, Christian pastor, just put together this great thing called How to Fight Racism. And it is designed for people to do in the church. It is designed whether or not you're doing it individually or whether or not you want to do it with your small group or whatever this summer. It comes from a Christian biblical perspective and worldview, and it speaks directly into these issues of reconciliation. So I have now seen the entire series, and it is a phenomenal series and will grow your experience. But that may not be for everybody. I don't know where you're starting off. Yeah. So one of the things that I'll say even too, like we're going to try to do this more, is have more episodes like this, so that maybe as we talk about it, maybe you're like, oh, that sounds interesting to me as well. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we would point to people to.
I think those are the big things. And, and as you're mentioning, like, man, for those of you that are listening right now, if you're watching on YouTube, like, if you've got questions, there's nothing saying that we're going to have the answers for it. But like, but I think, as we look to future podcasts, as we talk about this more, are there things that you would like us to address? Are there questions that, that this has been eating at me for a while? Like, feel free to send that in. Like you can email me, Mike P at rainierview.org. You can send it to Corey W at rainierview.org. And we would love to get, kind of a grab bag of questions together, maybe to fuel some future conversations. So
the last word on this, and I think, if this gets cut, that'd be okay with me. But, on a day like Juneteenth, I think I would just urge people again, if you struggle with I'm not sure what I believe about this, or I feel like I'm getting conflictory information from the political world or from the secular world or from wherever that's coming from, and maybe you're even like, I don't even know if this lines up with what I was taught growing up or what I believe the church should be doing. If that's where you're coming from, or if you're just like, I don't know, I'm just I'm all over the place. Again, I would say first, just remember the intention, or remember the motivation should always be first, love one another. As I have loved you, whether that be humbling yourself in this conversation, whether or not it be literally submitting yourself to some form of sacrifice. I think in this context, just remember that first. And the second thing is what you just said, which is ask questions, be a learner. And if you can do those two things, I don't think that there's any perspective on the spectrum of this discussion, from far right to far left, from high to low, wherever you fall on this. If those two things are true in your conversation, I don't think you can fail. I mean, we're definitely all learning, still growing, and all that kind of stuff, but I don't think that there's a way to mess it up. And so, we get emails that aren't always great. Some people aren't always coming from that perspective, and that's that's part of the job.
That's
but
reality.
My encouragement to anybody listening to this, if you've stuck around this long, if you're like stewing in your own pot of frustration, that if you come to us with a question or like a criticism or whatever, please just consider your heart first. Pray. I often tell students it's really hard to hate somebody you're praying for, and so like if you're mad at me right now, and that's great, that's fine. Just pray for me. Just spend a little pray for yourself, and then write the email, and I think God will direct your words a little bit better. So anyway,
that's awesome. Thanks, man. This has been great. This time has flown by. Thanks for listening. Don't be afraid to hit the subscribe button, because we would love to get more subscribers. And feel free to share this. And again, don't like, oh boy, I know who needs to listen to this. Like, man, don't do that. But if it's something that you found helpful and that you think others might find helpful, feel free to share it on social media or whatever platforms you're on, and we would love to get more and more people listening in. So thanks so much for listening, and we will catch you next time here on Bonus Features.
Thanks for joining the Rainier View Christian Church podcast. Be sure to hit that subscribe button to be notified for all future episodes. Be sure to connect with us on socials at Rainier View CC and find out more about us at rainierview.org.